Good evening and welcome to the DAAD Hubs event on German higher education in the 2020s, a post-election outlook. My name is Ingrid Hobbis and I help to manage our brilliant DAAD Research Hub for German Studies. We have a full program for you this evening, and before I hand over to Chris Young, who will be introducing our speaker and chairing our event, we will start with a short introduction about the Hub. We're very happy to have this opportunity to explain a little bit more about the DAAD Hub in the following short film. I had a bit of a job convincing Chris about the choice of music for this, as he apparently had something else in mind. I'm sure you'll all be wondering what that is, and hopefully he'll tell us after the film. I hope you enjoy the event.
Hi, I'm Chris Young. I'm the co-director of the DAAD Hub here in Cambridge, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed that film, and I hope you haven't been too disturbed or distracted by trying to think what music I wanted to have played under it. In fact, as a teenager in the 1980s, it would have been impossible for me not to select Nene's 99 Luftballons, but Ingrid disagreed heartily to that. Leaving that to one side, having cleared it up, it's my pleasure to introduce our main speaker this evening, Professor Joybrato Mukherjee, who is the new president of the DAAD. He took up his role in 2020, having served as vice president for some 7 years before that. Professor Mukherjee is also the president of the University of Giessen, and a very fine university that is. I know two things about it. One, it has a very cold railway station. I used to stand there for 17 minutes, basically every Sunday evening on my way back to Marburg. And let me tell you that that's just enough time not to get a drink and just enough time to get very cold on a cold railway platform. The other thing I've always known about this university in Giessen is that it has extremely specialized pockets of expertise. It's a 400-year-old university. It's named after Justus Liebig, who was the founder of modern agricultural chemistry. But it's really very well known in Germany and beyond, I think, for its expertise in theatre studies, and it has particular strengths in linguistics, I know as well. Professor Mukherjee is a linguistician. He is in the field of computational, computer-based corpus linguistics and English, and it's a great shame that we don't have you here with us this evening in person, but because we have great expertise in those areas ourselves at Cambridge. I'm sure you'll meet our colleagues in due course. Professor Mukherjee is about to speak to us. You will be able to ask questions by clicking on the link at the bottom of your screen, which says click here to ask questions. Don't be put off if you don't see them appear on the screen. We will get them and we'll process them and we'll put them to our speaker. So Professor Mukherjee, over to you. We're delighted to have you with us this evening.
Thank you, Chris, for this very kind and generous introduction. Honorable Vice Chancellor Stephen Toop, Honorable Pro-Vice Chancellors, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation. In Germany, we still don't know what the new federal government will look like, and my title is A Post-Election Outlook. It is, of course, a difficult phase now. The negotiations between the three political parties, the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals, are ongoing. A final agreement on the formation of a coalition government has not yet been reached. But it is becoming apparent that the times of the so-called GroKo, the Grand Coalition of Conservatives and Social Democrats, are over. Whatever the result of these talks will be, we can already sketch out today what is needed for a successful German higher education landscape in the 2020s. But as the German philosopher Odo Marquardt once said, Zukunft braucht Herkunft, the future is built on the past. Thus, I would like to take a brief journey through time beginning in the past, and I would like to sketch out 5 major trends in German higher education policy of the past 10 to 20 years first, then briefly comment on where we stand today, and finally try and provide an outlook on what is needed to preserve and extend our achievements over the past 10 to 20 years in the 2020s. Now, the first trend, over the past 25 years, we have seen a steady growth of autonomy of higher education institutions in Germany. The starting point was the introduction of the concept of new public management in the late 1990s. There was a general agreement that universities needed greater autonomy to develop efficiently and develop their individual profiles. At the same time, the idea that all universities could excel in all subject areas similarly, the fiction of homogeneity, if you so wish, was overcome step by step. In this process, universities were released from detailed control by the state ministries and emancipated gradually from the state. This included the granting of budget autonomy, followed and accompanied by the gradual allocation of personnel sovereignty, appointment decisions, and extensive freedom in the design of curricula. Second trend, the administrative freedom was accompanied by financial support. Public expenditure, both on the federal level as well as by the Länder, was significantly increased. The support on the federal level is remarkable because in Germany, as you know, higher education is the primary responsibility of the federal states, the Länder. In the period from 2010 to 2019, public expenditure on higher education institutions increased from 22.5 billion euros to 32.1 billion euros, a growth of 43%. With funding came people. The development of expenditure for higher education institutions is closely linked to the development of student numbers. From 2010 to 2020, the number of students in higher education institutions increased by 33% from 2.2 million to 2.9 million students. The basis for the substantially expanded financial framework for the university was provided, amongst others, by the so-called Pact for Higher Education, concluded between the federal government and the federal states, and the Excellence Initiative. The Pact for Higher Education has a total volume of almost 40 billion euros and was originally scheduled until 2023. In the meantime, it has been transformed into a permanent financing scheme. Third trend, German higher education institutions differentiated their portfolios and have formed their individual profiles. As a consequence, the higher education landscape in Germany has undergone major changes, but all, I would say, to the better. A differentiated higher education system can adapt more flexibly to changing societal demands. Higher education institutions can better focus on their strengths and thus improve their performance and international competitiveness. The Excellence Initiative, launched in 2005, has decisively accelerated this process. This initiative, too, has been transformed into a permanent scheme, now called the Excellence Strategy. Today, it is widely accepted that universities are not a homogeneous group, but that the higher education landscape rather consists of very different players with very different profiles. It is to be hoped, though, that this process of differentiation will remain a process of horizontal differentiation and not the beginning of the formation of a hierarchical climb between higher education institutions. Hand in hand with the increased differentiation went the fourth, very dynamic trend, a growing internationalization of higher education in Germany. Again, this development was politically wanted, and the federal government promoted largely the competition for internationally mobile students and academics and set up national internationalization strategies. As you can imagine, the DAAD supported this trend and development very strongly. The aforementioned process of differentiation has been an important factor in this context as it contributed to international mobility. Higher education institutions with a clear profile are better identifiable and can more easily and effectively attract mobile students and academics at home and abroad. Based on a unique institutional profile, it is also possible to look more specifically for cooperation partners among suitable higher education institutions in other countries. The fifth trend is linked to the fourth. Internationalization for German higher education institutions has also meant Europeanization. Being the oldest educational program of the European Union, Erasmus started funding exchanges in higher education in 1987. It is the largest and broadest ranging exchange program worldwide, and literally every single German university has profited from the mobility schemes of Erasmus. Recently, at a time when Europe and the European Union are facing a number of challenges, the initiative of the European University Networks struck a nerve with universities in Europe and especially in Germany. 35 German universities are involved in projects of European universities, clearly showing the need and desire for more Europe in the German higher education landscape. Through joint research and teaching, the European University Alliances contribute strongly to promoting and consolidating a European identity. So, 5 major trends: growing autonomy, substantial funding for a politically promoted growth of student numbers, the building of individual profiles, as well as a stronger international focus, and more specifically, a stronger focus on Europe. Against this background, where do we stand today? Regarding the first trend and the administrative freedom of universities, we see currently diverging degrees of autonomy across the Länder. All state constitutions grant higher education institutions the right of self-administration within the framework of the state law. However, the degree of autonomy varies across different fields and over time. Take, for example, financial autonomy, where the situation is heterogeneous. In Germany, financing of higher education is not a federal task, which means in consequence that the Länder have a special responsibility for their universities. In the state of Hesse, for example, where my own university is located, we can see how university autonomy can be strengthened to set the ground for a competitive higher education system. In 2020, a collaborative process between the 14 universities and the state of Hesse resulted in the Higher Education Pact of Hesse, as it was called. It grants the universities in Hesse a record investment of 11 billion euros until 2025. The granted state budget will increase every year by 4% automatically, thereby establishing a sound financial basis and verifiable key performance indicators. However, some new lines of conflict have evolved as some discussions have now been shifted partially to the intra-institutional level. For example, the university leadership on the one hand and the Senate and the faculties on the other, also in my own university, constantly argue about how to internally spend and distribute the global budget that the state provides. In general, it remains to be seen to what extent the 16 states will be willing to invest in their higher education systems after the pandemic. Some states have already reduced their budgets, for example, Lower Saxony. What is good to see in light of the current phase of the coalition negotiations in Berlin and the insecurities involved is the fact that the federal and the state governments have already agreed on the perpetuation of essential jointly funded elements of the budget for higher education. First, the aforementioned Higher Education Pact, with 2.1 billion euros per year. Second, the excellence strategy with 533 million euros per year. And also, thirdly, the so-called Pact for Innovation and Research, which has already been fixed for the next 10 years. This pact applies to the non-university research organizations and the German Research Foundation. Around 17 billion euros in additional funding will be made available for research until 2030. In some, German higher education institutions have made good use of their autonomy, and the funding by the federal government and the Länder had an overall stimulating effect. But it remains to be seen whether the next federal government will be as supportive of science, research, and education as Chancellor Merkel and her governments have been. Regarding the positive effects, the third trend of profile formation in higher education in Germany has successfully shown that the clear profile of a university is advantageous for students who have different interests and thus different preferences for different institutions. Take, for example, a small university like the European University Viadrina in Frankfurt-Oder. With an international, interdisciplinary, and European focus, the bridging function to Poland is the central aspect of its unique profile. Through a unique portfolio of subject areas, such as European law and interdisciplinary Polish studies, the European University attracts a specific group and type of students and academics. As for the fourth trend, we have seen that internationalization of German higher education has been a success story. Today, Germany as a place to study is highly sought after by international students. The mobility target of 350,000 foreign students at German higher education institutions by 2020, set by the federal government in 2013, was already met in 2017. In the last decade, numbers of international students at German higher education institutions have grown by 80%. Today, Germany is the top 4 destination for international students worldwide, outperformed only by the USA, the UK, and Australia. Internationalization, as I mentioned, includes Europeanization. The DAAD program of strategic partnerships and thematic networks, launched 10 years ago, served to some extent as a blueprint for the well-known Macron initiative of 2017, as it included some of the success factors and strengths of the Macron initiative, the European universities. The idea of the Macron initiative is a bottom-up network of universities across the EU, which shall enable students to obtain a degree by combining studies in several EU countries and contribute to the international competitiveness of European universities. To accompany the initiative in Germany, a national program called European University Networks EUN National Initiative was set up by DAAD. This national initiative specifically supports German higher education institutions within their own European university networks. Now, so far we have been taking stock of some of the major trends and results in and of higher education policy in Germany over the past 10 to 20 years. The last 1.5 years were, of course, largely characterized by the corona pandemic, an experience that had an enormous and possibly lasting impact on higher education worldwide. Against this background, let us look ahead and discuss the necessary measures to retain and build on the achievements in German higher education policy in the years to come. When it comes to the administration of higher education, it is key to preserve and expand autonomy, perhaps also through the formation of university alliances. Without any doubt, higher education institutions will remain between different forces: state, society, economy, and the specific interests of the students, as well as the constant changes in academic disciplines and forms of academic communication coming along with the ongoing powers of digitalization. COVID-19 has strained public budgets, and austerity programs will increasingly put pressure on legislators to set priorities. German universities seem to be aware of these threats. Some are using their organizational competencies to preserve and expand their autonomy through the establishment of alliances. A study from July 2020 has mapped 71 alliances across Germany. What benefits has an alliance to offer regarding autonomy? Alliances may help to guarantee the autonomy of each individual higher education institution and may include a collaboration on the strategic, subject-specific, and operational level. Alliances can benefit their members through joint optimization of processes, the sharing of resources, and the support for profile building. Through cooperation, they strengthen their position as agenda setters vis-à-vis higher education policy actors. Of course, alliances have to deal with the diversity of structures, processes, and cultures of the individual partner universities and must agree on competition and cooperation to combine the strengths of the individual network in order to achieve a common added value. This is challenging, but worth the effort, as success stories like the Berlin University Alliance shows in the current round of the Excellence Strategy. Regarding finances, governmental funding for science and education in Germany and worldwide must be a top priority against the backdrop of global challenges. Coping with the corona pandemic has put and will continue to put an enormous strain on public budgets. In addition, there are the increasingly intense efforts against climate change and its disastrous effects. These efforts too will require enormous resources. Needless to say, investment in research and teaching is a prerequisite to tackle global challenges such as climate change. However, the danger that the recent path of increased investment will not be continued is real. It is therefore necessary to campaign with all our might for the funding of the science system to be further strengthened and not deprioritized, as it were. In the past, substantial investments in higher education, like the Excellence Initiative and Strategy, gave individual universities and university alliances a strong push forward. However, these programs hold the danger of fostering a hierarchical distinction between high and low achievers in the higher education system. We need to make sure in Germany that all universities can continue to fulfill their valuable tasks, to act as driving forces for the advancement of science and technology, for education, for economic growth. The next government will need to take the initiative to provide the 16 states with the necessary means to ensure that all universities can provide solid research results and high-quality study programs. It is, for example, essential that much more is invested in the 2020s in university buildings and in universities' digital infrastructure. One of the major challenges of our time in Germany and elsewhere is to reconcile the dynamics of internationalization with the requirements of sustainable mobility. This is a major task for all higher education institutions and for us at DAAD as the world's largest funding organization for exchange and mobility. The 2020s will see, I'm sure, the emergence of new patterns and rhythms of exchange, combining in-person experiences with the digital and hybrid formats. Hopefully, the new government will support this process of developing new pathways to a more sustainable mobility world. And of course, we expect and hope that the new government will be devoted to the European integration process and be clear about the central role that higher education plays as a cohesive force at a time when in several European countries, the centrifugal forces get stronger and stronger. The European Universities Initiative, to me, may turn into a program with a long-term impact as forceful as Erasmus. Looking back at the original vision of President Macron, European universities must think beyond mere cooperation for the sake of winning funding applications. In times of growing populism and menacing nationalism on the rise, a shared European identity is needed more urgently than ever. Universities are at the center of promoting this ideal in the minds of the younger generation. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to close with a summary of the key messages that I would like to send also to those that are responsible for the formation of the new federal government in Berlin. 1, preserve and expand the autonomy of higher education institutions. 2, prioritize science against austerity measures as science contributes to solving global challenges. 3, strengthen the horizontal differentiation of universities to increase the attractiveness of the overall higher education system, but don't incentivize hierarchies within the higher education system. 4, support new climate-friendly patterns and formats of mobility, but accept the fact that science and education will always need exchange and mobility. And 5, increase your commitment to Europe, for example, by fostering the European Universities Initiative. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Mukherjee, for that excellent overview and the thought-provoking appeal to your own national government. Please, colleagues, students, friends who are watching, do click on the link at the bottom, send some questions, and Professor Mukherjee will look at these as they come in, gather some thoughts and respond to them. But in the meantime, we've got two other guests I'm delighted to introduce to you. We have Professor Peter André Alt, who is the president of the German Rectors Conference, the Hochschulrektorenkonferenz, which is roughly the equivalent of Universities UK. Prior to that, he was president of the FU Berlin. And I was going to say prior to that, but he seems to have keeping up a prodigious rate of production with his scholarship. He's very well known for his excellent, weighty, and rather brilliant biographies of Schiller, Kafka, Freud. Not only that, but he's managed in the last month to write with Beck Verlag a book about German universities, Exzellent zur Lage der Deutschen Universität. Welcome, Professor Alt. We've also got Dr. Katharina von Rütteschel-Katte, who is the director of the Goethe Institute in London and the director of the Goethe Institute for Northwest Europe. She did her PhD at the University of Bonn, where she majored in comparative literature, art history, and Germanic studies. And I think looking at her CV, it'd be fair to say that she has worked and served the Goethe Institute in as many interesting and important places as André Alt has written interesting and important books. So I'll list them very briefly. Moscow, Bangkok, Johannesburg, where you were responsible for sub-Saharan Africa, and before coming to London, Sao Paulo in Brazil, where the responsibilities spread across the whole of South America. So please keep the questions coming. I'm going to ask some questions of our two guests. Professor Mukherjee's talk gave some very positive, and I think rightly positive, views of the German system, and I'm sure we're all envious of those. In the last few weeks, it wouldn't surprise you to hear that the British press has been writing some early obituaries to Angela Merkel, and the FT had a measured view of her, pointing to the international victories and strengths, but also to some internal weaknesses. And amongst those internal weaknesses, the FT pointed to, and I quote, a creaking education system. So, Alt, I wonder if you would like to respond to that. Is the German education system actually creaking as well as excelling?
Thank you. I would say it's not really creaking, but you have to differentiate. First, you have to differentiate between the school system and the system of higher education, and then you have to particularly focus on the infrastructure. Danny Mukherjee, whose finding I will massively agree and underline, has elaborated on the situation of higher education. If you take a look at the school system is quite weak in terms of infrastructure, in terms of digitalization, and also with respect to certain inequalities. We still have the problem that many young people from disadvantaged backgrounds have no good access to the system, and there is not a real equality. We have a massive disbalance in the system, and we have to organize much more for establishing more full-day schools, more boarding schools, in order to balance this. So if you take a look at the European stage, you will find that the German system is really weak in terms of these opportunities and these opportunities. And I think this is also a result of 15 years missing interaction between the federal system and the Länder. we have already done a lot in order to push support for digitalization. There are 3.5 billion euros available for better infrastructure and another 1.5 billion for the next years. But this is not enough. I think this is really crucial. The system of higher education has been much better provided. And I think the way how it was coping the challenges of the last 2.5 years under the conditions of COVID-19 has revealed that the system has structurally good conditions for digital teaching and for virtual systems, but there are also some elements which must be improved. For instance, if we want to really establish a new system of hybrid teaching with a good and balanced mixture of virtual and face-to-face teaching, we must provide support for the campus infrastructure and also for the room situation. We need more flexible rooms. We have to completely redesign the campus environment to cope with this challenge and to also organize our universities with regard to a better outcome in teaching. So I think higher education is better equipped than the school system is, but there is still room for improvement, I guess.
Thank you. Frau von Rütschel, I know that the Goethe Institute conducted a worldwide survey of perceptions of German success around the world, and I believe there are some perceptions of German education. Have you got something you could share with us about that?
Yes, thank you. Actually, the survey was done together with DAAD and the GIZ, which is the Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, collaboration internationally. It was quite a big survey with in 37 countries, and also asking specialists quite broadly about German culture, German politics, German economy, German education. And I thought it was quite interesting to see, in a way, how especially the higher education was perceived. On the one hand, it was acknowledged and also kind of adored that the higher education is for students at low cost, and actually the accessibility is quite easy for students in Germany because of the low costs and the possibility to join it. But and also it was said that German students or students who actually study in Germany are quite free to choose their way of life. And I just quote that they say, young people in Germany are very independent. Students are on a very individualistic path, often left to their own devices. They are not treated like small children who have to have everything done for them. So I think it's quite positive feedback. On the other hand, however, this low cost and this positive thing is also a challenge, because we don't really advertise enough for our system, for the possibility possibilities to study in Germany. So that's quite a weakness we have. So the survey says that we internationally, we are not really competitive. And I think that is in a way quite true, because it is not so much known what kind of universities we have in Germany and where to go and study in Germany, because it is very individualistic, and not like in the UK, for instance, where not only Cambridge and Oxford, but also the other universities have international ranking, and everybody knows about the British universities. So I think there's quite a lot to do for us.
Thank you very much. Professor Mukherjee touched on the coalition the formation of the coalition, which we're watching with great interest. I love seeing the different flag colours and traffic light system, etc., etc. I think it's fair to say that the last federal education minister came from the CDU, and that will not be the case this time. So I guess the question is, are you eyeing up the SPD, the Greens, the FDP, and thinking, I'd really like it if they got in, or does it not really matter as such in Germany? Herr Alt.
Thank you. First of all, unfortunately, higher education and research topics didn't play a role in the campaigns of the respective parties, neither in the public debate. I think this is revealing that there is a general, let's say, non-interest in the topic, but in fact, the system of research and higher education is crucial for the future. And fortunately, the parties have had this in mind when they wrote their programs. In particular, the Green Party was very strongly focusing on research, but the same did the Social Democratic Party. First of all, I would single out that my point of view is we need a strong ministry. We must not change the structure of the ministry. We must even strengthen the ministry. And my serious concern is that the cohesion of the ministry could be at stake, because the ministry is actually consisting of higher education, Bildung, but also of research and science. And we have certain signals and have witnessed that there is an interest of at least the Liberal and the Green Party to establish a new ministry responsible for economy, infrastructure, innovation, and digitalization. And this could entail that a part of our Ministry of Higher Education and Research could be switched into this new ministry. And if they move this, they also weaken the influence of the traditional ministry. I very much hope, and I try to do my best also to influence the parties of this opinion, that this will not happen. If we take a look at the parties, I think we can say that there is a certain interest of both the Social Democratic Party and the Green Party to win this ministry, and that they have also politicians who have the right expertise to do so, in particular some who had already been responsible for the field in the respective ministries of the lands. Unfortunately, in most cases, if it comes to finding people for the Bund, the experts from the Länder do not play an important role, even though it would be a good idea because they have the expertise. So I hope in this case it will be not happening, and that we have people with an expertise coming from the land and strengthening the ministry, not weakening it by separating the respective parts from each other.
Thank you. Frau Rüther-Schalkatter, we're looking to you to help speak, perhaps also on the behalf of the DAAD, but on behalf of Goethe. We're all very interested to know if any of our money is going to be cut via these august institutions. So are you optimistic on behalf of the Goethe Institute that regardless of what happens in the next few months, everything will be fine?
I'm actually quite optimistic, I must say. We all know after COVID, there must be cuts or so. But on the other hand, I think that the pandemic and also other crises that happen at the moment showed that especially the field of culture, education, research is a field that is a sustainable one, and that we have to invest in to actually solve crises, because we are the ones who are reaching out internationally. We are the ones, I mean the ones working in culture and education. We are the ones who actually bring the world together and collaborate together, be creative together. So I think I'm quite optimistic, especially as the parties, we all assume it will be the Social Democrats, the Green Party, and the Liberals to have a coalition. So I do think that they will invest in these issues, especially when they look at the foreign cultural and educational policies. I do believe, and they also put it in their programs, although I agree with Mr. Alt that that might not always be realized in the end, but at least they thought about it, and they all said that they want to support the freedom of arts and culture and science. They all want to support the UN Agenda 2030. They all want to support the so-called Mittler Organisation like the DAAD and the Goethe Institute and others, especially in times when there are things at stake like democracy, like the values, like our world being in a climate crisis and so on. So I'm quite optimistic that that we will be supported in the future by the new government.
That's really good news, and I come to a very exciting moment for me because I see that Professor Chris Clark has posted a comment which I get to read out. It's a very rare moment where Chris Clark is silent and I'm allowed to speak. As you know, Chris is a great mimic, and this does not stop him. It even extends to his being a good mimic of me as a student straight from Belfast in the 1980s. So Chris, I would like to get my own back and impersonate you, but I'm not quite as good a mimic as you are, so I'll read this straight. So Chris's question for Professor Mukherjee is, it's always struck me as odd and even truly excellent that even truly excellent German universities are relatively low in the most prestigious global ranking tables. For example, the universities placed at 1, 2, and 3 in Germany are ranked at 50, 63, and 64 in the most widely used UK global ranking table. Chris's question, I'm sure other colleagues will want to know the answer to this. Why is this? Is it the rankings are skewed towards features that are specific to the Anglophone world, or is there some other reason?
Well, yeah, that's something we need to explain throughout the year to everyone in the world, why the ranking situation of German university is as it is. I think it is not because the system is skewed, but because we in Germany have a very complex, multifaceted system with a number of institutions, organizations, with actually also a division of labor. Take the 2 Nobel Prize winners in Germany in this round. Their primary affiliation is not a university, but a Max Planck Institute. And it's what my colleague, the Max Planck president, always says: if we were a university, if we were ranked, then we would be in the top 10. So what we have in Germany, unfortunately, if you so wish, is the fact that we have the university system, but we also have the extramural organizations, Max Planck, Helmholtz, Leibniz, Fraunhofer, and very often professors at universities have Max Planck or Fraunhofer as their primary affiliation. And of course, the question then is, where do you count their merits and who is credited? That's, I think, a significant factor, because if you look at I do not think that the German system is weaker in essence. If you look at the German universities in the top 200 tier, then we fare fairly well. But there are not the top institutions, because many of the top scientists are, for example, affiliated with Max Planck, and Max Planck doesn't show up in the university rankings. And so we always have to explain to outsiders that the German system is more complex than other systems, and that many leading scientists in Germany are not affiliated with a single or individual university. That makes it complicated, but I don't think it tells you, I don't think that the system is skewed. 5, 6 years ago, by the way, we launched a project as DAAD together with Tübingen and Dresden. So a project that was intended to improve the data inputting procedure for the Times Higher Education ranking. And the outcome of this project together with Tübingen and Dresden was that once we optimize the data inputting procedure, the ranking improves as well. Some spoke 5 years ago of the miracle of Tübingen, because all of a sudden Tübingen jumped from 200 something to 100 something. But this had nothing to do with the performance of Tübingen, obviously. It had something to do with the way we feed our data into the Times Higher Education system. And we were just too, perhaps too passive about this and not passionate enough about, giving the optimal data, giving the right data to Times Higher. This has improved, by the way.
Yeah, I think even a university like Cambridge has issues at times with the right sort of data getting in the right place. So we're all concerned about that. I'd like to come to Alt again on this. I note that you have a chapter in your recent book called, I think it's Harvard, Oxford und wir, or Oxford, Harvard und wir. I'm sure you have a broader view on this as well as to where German universities stand in that larger cultural context.
I should underline what Danny Mukherjee has said. I think the structural differentiation of the system is an aspect which is weakening us in international competition. The second aspect is about staff. If you take a look at the system, you have many doctoral positions which are based on appointment. So our doctor students in most cases are formally enrolled, but they have a position. They do not have a stipend. We have abandoned this because of social reasons. And for this reason, we have a relatively high number of positions under the professorships, which are temporary, which are filled by people who can be described as first stage researchers, early stage researchers, who do not publish much because they shouldn't. They should focus on their thesis projects. And this is one reason why the output, the publication output, is relatively low in relation to the people who are on board. And this is also a weakness of the system, I think. Second, I should again focus on the non-university, the extramural institutions. We have a lot of double affiliations. There is no Max Planck director who is not a professor of a affiliated university. But if he is publishing, he just published as a Max Planck director, not as a professor of the university. So this is also weakening our quantitative data. And there are many other aspects I could mention. I think if you take a look at the financial situation, you must also underline we are publicly funded. We are funded on a relatively high level, but we are not allowed to charge tuition fees. And for this reason, there is also always a lack of funding, which limits our space for action. I think this is also one point which should be mentioned if it comes to the difference of the respective systems, UK and Germany. But I think another aspect should be also mentioned. We have a very sufficient funding system. And if you take a look at not only the German Research Foundation, but also take a look at the many foundations which came up during the last years. We are a very rich country. We are a country of heirs, people who earned a lot of money. And they have established foundations, many of them dedicated to topics of research, to promoting research. And in terms of that, I would say that we should do much better than we really do. And I think we should optimize our funding schemes. There are a lot of funding schemes and a lot of opportunities in the country which are not that present. Researchers themselves do not know whether they can be promoted, where they can be supported. And I think this is one structural weakness the system is very much suffering from. We have a scattered system, and there are so many single institutions, single funding lines, schemes that no one can bring this together. And this puzzling situation must be overcome. And I think we must concentrate funding schemes, programs, and also must concentrate institutions, not in the sense of a merger, but in the sense Danny Mukherjee has addressed it, in the sense of alliances which can strongly join their forces. And this is, I think, what we really need in the next years.
Thank you very much. Time is moving on. I've got one final question for Herr Mukherjee, and then I'm going to go to our Vice-Chancellor after this. Herr Mukherjee, I was struck, and I saw this table myself just the other day, at Germany's ranking for international students. So 4th behind the US, the UK, and Australia. I've said for a number of years now, we have to keep our eye on Germany. Germany has been internationalizing for at least the last 10 years. And I noted that in your own university, in nearly every degree program, some courses you guarantee are taught in English. I think the move towards teaching in English in Germany is a good thing. It's not good if you're a Germanist, I think, but it's a good thing in general. I think it is a threat to the UK. And I wonder what your view in that is. Is the ambition to overtake Australia and the UK in the coming years? And how well embedded are international students in universities in Germany? What's their experience?
Well, the rate of students that drop out of their study program is still significantly higher for international students than for domestic students. So this is something we have to continuously work on. 49% of all international bachelor students drop out at some point. This is much higher than for domestic students, where the rate is 27%. And at the master's level, it's the same. So this is certainly a homework for us. But apart from that, and independently from that, I think it is obvious that the German higher education system has become more and more attractive for international students. 2 or 3 years ago, we overtook France, and I don't think that Australia, UK, and USA, we won't overtake them simply because of linguistic reasons, and there is a language barrier for many. Of course, there are some unique constellations, like at the Technical University of Munich, where my former colleague Wolfgang Herrmann introduced a very rigid language policy. They will turn all their study programs into English step by step, but this will not hold true for all German universities, should not and will not be the case. And therefore, we offer more in English, that's true, especially for credit students coming over for a semester or 2 semesters abroad. Increasingly also study programs entirely taught in English. But of course, the major and primary medium of instruction at German universities will continue to be German. And there will always be a language barrier. But being the top 4 destination is a wonderful ranking, I find. And it will be very difficult for us to keep Germany within the top 5 group, given that other actors, other players, take China, for example. China is internationalizing massively, as you all know, massively. If you walk across a Chinese campus today, it's a very different picture from what I saw 10 years ago. So this will be a challenge for us. But I do also think that we are nearing a certain threshold that we won't overcome. 350,000, perhaps 400,000. That's also probably the proportion that we can also deal with at German universities, given also the resources that we have. As Andreal just mentioned, I mean, we are publicly funded, which is good on the one hand, but on the other, it also means we don't have universities with endowments. We don't have universities with technical universities with a budget like the ETH Zurich. So all the German universities have to deal with, medium-sized budgets. And there is not a single state where the number of international students is appropriately fed into the budgeting system. So for us in Giessen, for example, a typical, very representative, prototypical German universities, for us, it's irrelevant budget-wise whether we have 10% international students or 5% or 20%. It is irrelevant with regard to our budget. And as long as there is no incentive, why should we increase the number of international students from a certain figure onwards if it doesn't, have a positive effect on the budget? So I guess 350,000 to 400,000, that's it. And it will be a challenge for us to retain the number 4 position. So
Okay.
you don't have to worry in the UK, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. We're delighted to have our Vice Chancellor, Professor Stephen Toop, with us. We have just a very small number of minutes left. Professor Alt needs to be in Los Angeles at 6 o'clock sharp to open an event there. But I'm going to hand to Professor Toop, and then I'll close after that.
Thank you very much, Chris. And let me express my thanks to Professor Mukherjee, Professor Alt, and Dr. von Rucksteschel. Really a useful conversation. And it just prompts a couple of reflections, if I may, very briefly. One, autonomy of universities. You emphasize this, and I think it is a constant struggle to continue to ensure autonomy of our institutions. We in the United Kingdom confront this around consumerist sensibilities, and we confront it around attempts by government to shape even how we have discourse within universities. There's a new initiative to create a free speech legislation for universities. The principle, of course, is good, but how it plays out in practice could be problematic. You emphasize digital infrastructure, and I think that's absolutely crucial and is related to the international sustainable mobility. I think if we don't have good digital infrastructures, our mobility becomes less sustainable and more difficult to achieve. I also wanted to pick up on the point that Peter Andre made around a strong ministry. We in the United Kingdom have a divided ministry where research is in one and education is in another. It is not a good system. So I hope that you will continue to press for that. Finally, I'd only say good luck to German colleagues as you look for a new government with new policies. And I hope that you will wish us good luck in the United Kingdom as we continue to navigate Brexit, the implications of which have been hidden, I think, or masked by COVID, but we're now confronting them much more directly around mobility. We worry about the continuing participation in European research funding. That is by no means guaranteed. So please help us continue to make that case. And then finally, student mobility and researcher mobility are really problematic potentially for us going forward. It's great to have these conversations. We share so much. It's important that both of our systems are as strong as possible going forward. So thank you, Chris and colleagues, for organizing this really important conversation. It's lovely to see you all.
Thank you, Stephen, for coming and for closing. I will close formally now and let people go off and enjoy their evening. Brexit is indeed a topic that we didn't discuss this evening, and we could have done. I'm sure we will be discussing it again in future, and indeed in the very near future. But it just remains for me to thank Professor Mukherjee, Professor Andre Alt, Dr. von Rucksteschel-Katter, and also our colleagues, Jamie and his colleagues at Wave FX, who have facilitated this. And my special thanks to Ingrid Hobbes, as always, not just for forcing me to reveal my 1980s pop interests, but also for putting together this event for us, which has been fantastic. So thank you all very much, and we hope to see you all again soon.